This video lecture is meant to cover the information found in Unit 14, Solutions in Equilibrium. It is Chapter 16 in your textbook, and today's lesson we will understand and distinguish the vocabulary related to solutions. This is the vocabulary that you just did in your notebook. We will describe the factors that determine the quantity and the rate at which a substance dissolves, and we will interpret solubility curves. So a couple of the vocabulary terms that you saw, the first few, solute, solvent, solution, and solvation, have to do with the dissolving process. Let's take a look at this video where we get to see sodium chloride dissolving in water. It's an animated scheme to kind of give you an idea of what's happening at the molecular level.
Sodium chloride crystals are held together by attractive forces between the positively charged sodium and negatively charged chloride ions. When a crystal of sodium chloride is placed into water, the hydrogen ends of polar water molecules attract the negatively charged chloride ions and gradually surround them. Likewise, the oxygen ends of water molecules are attracted to and surround the positively charged sodium ions. The hydrated ions drift away into the solution, allowing new water molecules to surround newly exposed ions. Gradually, the entire crystal dissociates into solution.
So, a solute, in this case the sodium chloride, those were the dissolved particles in the solution. Typically a solute, there will be fewer particles than there will be the solvent. The solvent is the molecule that sort of rips apart the solute to allow it to disperse evenly. So we say the solvent is the dissolving medium in a solution. Typically there are more particles than the solute, more particles of a solvent than there are of a solute. In this example, in this video, the liquid water was the solvent. So think of the solvent as being the substance that tears apart the solute and allows it to evenly distribute throughout the solvent. The solution is the mixture that results from this process. It is a homogeneous mixture, which means everything is evenly dispersed. It consists of the solutes dissolved in a solvent, and in this example, the salt water, the brine, is the example of the solution. So keep in mind, a homogeneous mixture is the same thing as a solution. Solvation is the process of the solute dissolving into the solvent. Okay, so these are all terms that are all very similar. They're all related to the same process, but you do need to understand the distinction. A couple other terms, miscible versus immiscible. Typically these words are used to describe when two liquids are dissolving in one another. So you have a liquid solute and you have a liquid solvent. Right, so miscible is when the liquid solute dissolves in a liquid solvent, but immiscible is when the liquid solute won't dissolve in a liquid solvent. Let's take a look at this video where you're going to see two nonpolar substances, the hexane and the carbon tetrachloride. This will be the bottom layer that will have the dissolved iodine in it, and then there will be polar water that will be a layer in between. So let's take a moment to watch this video.
Nonpolar carbon tetrachloride is poured into a test tube. When a nonpolar colored solid is added, the solid dissolves in the carbon tetrachloride. When polar water is added to the test tube, it forms a layer on top of the carbon tetrachloride, since water is immiscible with and less dense than carbon tetrachloride. When nonpolar hexane is added to the test tube, it forms a layer on top of the water, since hexane is immiscible with and less dense than water. When the test tube is vigorously shaken, the two nonpolar liquids form a single layer at the bottom of the test tube, and the polar water layer sits above this layer.
So one of the things that you may have noticed, initially the iodine dissolved in with the nonpolar carbon tetrachloride because the iodine, which is a solid, is nonpolar and it dissolves in the nonpolar carbon tetrachloride. It was easier to see with the iodine mixed in with it. The polar water and the nonpolar carbon tetrachloride, these two were immiscible in one another. They did not mix. When they carefully poured the third layer on top, the hexane, also nonpolar, it formed a third layer on the top. But when they mixed all of the liquids together, they temporarily looked like one mixture. But then you notice that there was only two layers at the end, and that's because the nonpolar hexane and the nonpolar carbon tetrachloride were able to dissolve in one another. They were able to be miscible with one another. So these, the top layer and the bottom layer, combined into one layer, and the water separated out and kept as a separate second layer. Concentration is a measurement of the amount of solute that is dissolved in a given quantity of solvent. Concentration is usually expressed as molarity, which is defined as the moles of solute per liters of solution, and the larger the molarity number is, the more concentrated it is. You can see on these labels we have 1 molar solutions on this large bottle, but we have 0.08 molar concentration of this solution. So this is the bottle on the right is more concentrated than the bottle on the left. When you see the terms concentrated or dilute, these are comparative terms. Here we have a diagram that shows a darker pink solution on the left and a lighter pink solution on the right. The solution on the left is considered to be more concentrated than the solution on the right, or you could say that the solution on the right is more dilute than the solution on the left. So concentrated means you have a solution containing a large amount of solute, and dilute means you have a small amount of solute relative. This is all relative to the amount of solvent that you have. So there's two things you can do to make a concentrated solution dilute. Well, the easiest thing that you can do to make a concentrated solution dilute is to add water, add solvent. So if you were to add water to this concentrated solution, it would become more dilute. If you wanted to take this dilute solution and make it more concentrated, you could do two things here. You could add solute to it, or you could let the solvent evaporate. And that way the solvent would evaporate, but the solute would stay behind and it would become more concentrated. So bottom line here is that concentrated and dilute are comparative terms. Solubility. Solubility is defined as the amount of a substance that dissolves in a given quantity of solvent at a specific temperature and pressure to produce a saturated solution. This graph shows you a number, maybe 8 or 10 different substances, and their solubility in 100 grams of water. So this graph is a little bit confusing because there are so many things going on, so many different substances being shown here. So your job is to kind of focus in on the substance that you're being asked about or being asked to study. So we're going to take a closer look at this KNO3, this potassium nitrate curve right here. We're going to take a closer look at that at this next slide. Alright, so the line represents a saturated solution, and so we have to understand what that means. A saturated solution is a solution that contains the maximum amount of solute in a given amount of solvent. So the given amount of solvent on this graph is 100 grams of water. So that's sort of the standard for all of these solutions, is measuring the concentration in 100 grams of water. And that solubility will vary depending on the temperature. Now this graph shows you that as you increase the temperature, you can dissolve more grams of the KNO3 in the water as the water gets hotter and hotter. So what the line represents is a saturated solution. And to give you an idea what a saturated solution is, so this is a pile of KNO3. Here's the 100 grams of water. And so when you put this KNO3 into the water will dissociate as much KNO3 as possible to the point where there will still be a little bit of KNO3 left over on the bottom. You can kind of see that little white pile at the bottom there. So no matter how hard you stir, you can't get any more salt to dissolve into the water. That's when you know that the water is saturated with that particular solute at that particular temperature. So let's take a look at 40 degrees Celsius in 100 grams of water. So at 40 degrees Celsius, you would find the 40-degree temperature line, you read up to the curve, and you can see that about 65 grams of KNO3, right about here, read over, it's about 65 grams of KNO3 can fit in 100 grams of water. This is what we say is a saturated solution. So any point on this curve represents a saturated solution. So anything on that line is a saturated solution. An unsaturated solution is a solution containing less solute than a saturated solution. So let's stay with our 100 grams of water. Now at 40 degrees Celsius, we're going to put in 50 grams of KNO3. So 40 degrees, find the 40 degree line, read up to 50 grams on the chart, and you'll see that that's a point right about there. It's below the line. Okay, so any point on this graph anywhere down under here will be an unsaturated solution. Okay, so anything down here will be unsaturated. Now you can have a supersaturated solution. This is a solution containing more solute than it can theoretically hold at a given temperature. So that would be any temperature and solubility above the curve on one of these solubility graphs. So a supersaturated solution, how is that even possible? Right? So the only way you can really do this is to start, well here, let's take a look. Here we have a supersaturated solution where a seed crystal has been introduced, and it's not a stable solution, so as soon as you put the seed crystal in, all the excess solute precipitates out very, very quickly. Okay, this is a video of sodium acetate that has been made into a supersaturated solution. Not every solute can do this. The solutes that can do this, the way you would make them is you would start with a saturated solution and very gently, very carefully cool it down to the point where you don't allow it to precipitate out. It's an uncommon thing, and only, like I said, only certain things can do this. Ask me about showing this to you as a specific demonstration in class. Solubility of solid solutes. Most solids will increase their solubility with higher temperatures. So you can see here that any curve that is going up and to the right, KClO3, NaCl, KCl, NH4Cl, KNO3, NaNO3, and Ki, those are all solids. Solids generally, for our purposes, will have an increase in solubility with higher temperatures. Higher temperatures means higher kinetic energy of the solvent, and that means the dissolving process will happen faster. How can you increase the solubility of solid solutes? Well, we just saw that you can increase the heat to make the solubility increase. You can stir. So you want to make your Kool-Aid dissolve really, really fast in water, heat it up and stir it. Well, stirring seems pretty obvious. Heat seems kind of weird because you don't want to drink it hot. But if you wanted to dissolve the Kool-Aid quickly, heat would be the way to go. Then you could cool it down, make it more interesting to drink. The other thing you could do is increase the surface area. So if you were to take your Kool-Aid powder and crush it even finer, you would get it to dissolve that much faster. So what does this really mean to increase surface area? Well, if you had a particle that was this size and you cut it in half, you'd get these two cubes. Well, now there's an additional surface area exposed in between that you didn't have back here. Take each one of those cubes and break them down into further cubes. In all those spaces in between where they were cut, now all of a sudden there's all these surface areas exposed. And that means solvent, the water molecules, can get into all those nooks and crannies and just speed up that dissolving process. So increased surface area means you're going to have more particles, but the particles are going to be tinier, but it exposes more surface area for the solute to be dissolved by the solvent. Now gas solutes do something very different. On that big graph that you saw with all those solubility curves, the lines that go down and to the right, those represent gases. Gases have a different behavior in terms of solubility than solids do. Most gases will decrease solubility with higher temperatures. That means the warmer the liquid, the gases can't stay dissolved and they come out of solution. Best example is when you have carbon dioxide in pop. Cold pop, there's more fizz because there's more carbon dioxide that can stay dissolved. But warm pop, if you let it sit out and it's warm, the warm water forces the gas to want to turn into a gas. And so it escapes really easily. So that's why it's really important to keep the cap on really tightly to not allow that carbon dioxide to escape. So here's the thing, what would happen if you were to take a bottle of root beer, a copper pipe that's been heated in a Bunsen burner, and drop that copper pipe into the root beer? Ask me about that demonstration in class. And that concludes our video lecture on solubility. I'll see you in the classroom.